Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Should Have Recorded That with Phil and
Adam.
Hey, Adam.
Phil, how
What's
are
up?
you today?
I'm tired today, but it's a good day.
Well,
It's a
I
good
mean, I
tired.
wasn't gonna say anything, but you look tired.
I look tired. I feel tired.
I know, Phil. I'm not gonna take much time, but I've got to ask you, how is gym class going?
It's going well. It's going well. I found a very good exercise channel on YouTube that helps me out a whole lot.
Yes, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
for anyone who wonders what I'm talking about, please just go back and listen to last week's episode 14.
Yes, please do that. Please do that. Well, so while we're encouraging our listeners to go back and check out previous episodes, I'll just remind you all that you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram at WSRTWPA.
Wapa.
Yes. So it's gonna catch, and it's gonna be like Google. It's gonna be like Google one day. You know, it's just gonna be.
People are gonna type and they're gonna say, "I was Wapa."
Yeah, it's gonna. You know, I'm speaking it.
I'm here for that. Absolutely.
You can also find us on YouTube by our title, and you can also find us on all major platforms and most other platforms as well. The podcast. So please engage with us. We're thankful for those that are and who are leaving comments. We really appreciate that. So
Yes.
yeah, I guess
That is my dog. I think she's barking at nothing, but you know, that's her way.
okay.
We're real professional act here.
Yeah.
With my bee, making a cameo in every episode.
Right. It's whatever she's barking at. She's really they're gonna get her. She's gonna get their attention.
That's okay. You know what? She is a great guard dog until the intruder actually enters the house, in which case she's just like, play with me.
right.
At least I'll know they're coming.
Right. That's all you need. You know, you can prepare.
Yes.
That's all you need. So I don't think we have any. Do you have any listener comments?
No, I think we can move right on to introducing our guest for today's episode.
Great.
Why don't you do so I can mute my barking dog?
Okay. All right. So we have Pastor Anthony Selvaggio with us here today, and to continue to come back to our conversation on liturgy. Pastor Anthony is the pastor of the Rochester Christian Reformed Church in Rochester, New York, and that's where I met Pastor Anthony. He's also an author. He's written at least one book that I know on Luther. You are a lawyer. You've studied law. You left the law profession to come back to being a pastor at Rochester Christian Reform. Is there something else that we should say in lieu of the introduction for you, Pastor Anthony? Welcome. I should say that first.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. No, I think you got it there. Yeah.
What I will add for loyal listeners of this podcast that Anthony Selvaggio is in fact related to our number one fan.
They are related.
Who writes us fan mail.
Yes.
And I mean, really, she's just a teacher's pet. But Michelle Selvaggio of Wapa fame,
yes,
is the wife of Anthony Selvaggio.
Yes, or I'm the husband of
That
Michelle
is
Selvaggio.
that is simultaneously true.
Right. Right. What, and also a father. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting your two children, and they really enjoyed getting to know them. So,
Yeah, you gonna make it for Thanksgiving this year, Phil?
I don't know. Maybe I mean, if I could spend half Thanksgiving, half of the day in Rochester and half in Mobile, maybe we could do that. I don't know.
That seems doable.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But welcome again, Pastor Anthony.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks
Thanks
for
for having
being
me.
here. So, Pastor Anthony, we've been doing a bunch of episodes on liturgy, and we will. I'm gonna just get there in a moment, but all of our conversations really just become thoughts from fascinating people. So you should feel no pressure at any time to stay on topic.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own religious upbringing and background and how you've come to where you are today, a pastor of a Christian Reformed church?
All right. So I was raised as kind of a nominal Catholic, and so I did my religious classes. I had all the sacraments up to through my confirmation, and but we were really. I couldn't even say I was a Christmas and Easter Catholic. I was more culturally Catholic, so in college is when I met someone in a political thought class as we were studying John Calvin, and I'm like, what kind of idiot would believe this nonsense? And there was a woman in class who said, well, I believe it, and if you want to come hear it, you can come to my church. And so I went there. I went to church with her, and that's really where I heard the gospel preached, and from her grandfather, who was the pastor at the time, and that's really where I was converted, and also where I got my wife, by the way. So it was my wife Michelle who was the person in my class who shared that, and it worked out pretty well for me. And so then after that, I decided to. I went to law school, as Phil mentioned. I practiced law for a while, but I always was interested in going to seminary, and I eventually did that in a tradition, which is what would be interesting for your conversation. It was the Reformed Presbyterian Church of North America, which descends from the Scottish Covenanters, and it has a very strong view of the regulative principle of worship. And I'd say, historically had been a rather kind of followed a simple, almost a Puritan-like kind of liturgical style, really strewing all types of, anything that would even, slightly resemble popery, anything that would be smells and bells, or, and we're very suspicious of liturgy as entirely. But that kind of changed as I was actually part of that process. There was a worship committee to rewrite the directory of worship in that denomination, and I was on that committee, and so there was kind of a influx of folks. I'd say maybe I'm not young anymore, but we were kind of the young Reformed, and we're kind of going back to this more Calvinistic route of recapturing liturgy in the life of the church and bringing that back into that church. And then when I moved back, I pastored around Geneva College near Pittsburgh, in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, and then moved back here for a lot of reasons. I went back into law, and then I started attending the Christian Reformed Church, and really got there through Christian education, through the Christian school where our kids were going. My wife was working as a teacher. She's now the principal of the school, so pray for her, by the way. First day today. But then I kind of really connected with the Christian Reformed Church, and one of the things that was appealing to me about our church was the traditional Reformed liturgy that it had, and the organ, kind of a traditional, not a praise band kind of approach. And then the pastor left that was there, and I had filled in, and one thing led to another, so to speak, and we got married, and so and here I am now. So pastoring during COVID-19, great decision on my part.
Just in time.
Right.
Just in time.
Yeah, I mean, have you and
that's my story.
Just a sidebar. Have you been fully ordained a year? Because I know there was a little bit of a process as a pastor. That's what I'm saying. Because I know you were doing some classes while you were pastoring. So has it been a year for you yet?
Yeah, I was in CRC purgatory for a period of time. So I was ordained once obviously in the Reformed Presbyterian Church, but for a variety of reasons, that did not transfer. So I had to do a little remedial learning,
okay.
And there was some hot coals and some hazing involved, and there was a secret handshake I had to learn. I had to pass the psych test, and so I always like to tell my family I'm the only one that's really certified as being normal in my house, because I have papers to prove it. So,
yes.
But I made my way in, and so yes, I've been ordained. So I started out as a commission pastor as I was working through this process, and I do want to say that I was. The denomination itself, the people I worked with, particularly on candidates and credentials who made all this happen, they moved mountains to work all this out. So, and people in the church too, is great. But so it's 2 years. Like my first year, I was maybe it is only a year and a half. It might be from a year March was probably right.
Okay.
Yeah, this is my second year as an actual ordained minister of the Word. Yeah.
Well, great.
Yeah. How would you? So liturgy at its base, at its foundation, is the work of the people. So how did the work of the people differ in the RPC versus in the CRC? What are some concrete differences in the way that those two denominations worship?
Well, I think, the obvious one that would hit anybody was that the RP Church sings exclusively psalms without instrumental accompaniment, a cappella. So that's a big one. That's a huge one. But that flows out of what is a different perspective. So that the regular principle of worship is strongly adhered to. The commandment, following out of the second commandment, basically you can only do in worship what is expressly commanded by God, and that's where ultimately they get to the argument of singing psalms. So that would be the major one. I mean, I think in the Christian Reformed Church, and I would say most continental churches, they took a different view of the regulative principle. They would still give certain assent to that, but they would not apply it as prohibitively. And I think certainly in the CRC, I really don't hear it talked about very much, and that it's more of the view, kind of a Lutheran view, that if it's not forbidden, you could do it. So it's kind of the opposite turn of its head. So that would be the major difference. The liturgical forms, however, like the church I pastored in the Reformed Presbyterian Church had a liturgy that was very similar to what is in the Christian Reformed Church, partly because I implemented it as pastor when I was there. So in that sense, other than singing psalms exclusively, it would be very similar as an experience on Sunday. A little more simple. I think we have in our particular congregation, partially thanks to you, Adam, a more sophisticated, broad, classical Christian, just kind of musical selection and musical choice and performance, and an organ, and obviously, an accomplished organist. So things like that are a little bit different. There were no bells in the RPCNA. You did have a little thing. You could use a a little pitch pipe.
Oh, okay. To get
That instrument you could use because
Yes.
it was only facilitating getting the tune.
You do need to find what key you're in.
Yes.
As a musician, I can appreciate that.
But I will tell you this, as I am not. There's a lot to commend psalm singing. I miss a lot of it, and it really does have a shaping of who you are, and also you're just kind of memorizing scripture. It's pretty powerful that way, and it's certainly part of the Reformed tradition, and even the Christian Reformed Church at one time sang only psalms. So it's unusual now, but historically, Reformed wise, not that unusual, except for those Lutherans like Woodard with their singing of their barroom tunes.
Yeah, okay. I know. Phil has gone astray.
I'm every day I'm leaning more and more towards Luther. At least I'm leaning towards his doctrine. I'm going to clarify because Adam is going to kind of get on me. I'm leaning more and more towards his doctrine, his theology every day. So I think something that you mentioned before, or maybe I want to step back. So why do you think we're talking about liturgy? Why do you think liturgy is important? And also with that, we've had this conversation before. Like we all have some type of liturgy. Every church has a type of liturgy. It just depends on whether you're conscious or intentional about it. So maybe could you kind of say why is liturgy important, and then kind of deal with the fact that we all do have liturgy.
Yeah, I think that point is so true, because I have people who say, we're not a liturgical church. Well, everybody has a liturgy, as you say, just like everybody has a confession, whether they write it down or not. They do that. So there's a Dutch theologian whose name is Gerardus van der Loo, and he said this: one can't tap the finger of liturgy without immediately getting the whole hand of theology. And I think that's right. That's why liturgy is important, because it is a reflection of your theological orientation, perspective. It says something about what you think, who do you think God is, and what you think about the relationship between God and humanity, and what worship is about. And so, to me, that's a significant part of why liturgy is important, because it's a reflection of your theological perspective and what you are really trying to proclaim about the character, nature of God, and the people's relationship to God.
How does, concretely, how does liturgy shape us? How does it form our theology?
So, in my context, what I like, the two principles. So a Reformed theological perspective, Reformed liturgy, would try to convey, I think, three basic things. One, that our relationship to God is covenantally structured, that there's a covenant relationship, and that would emerge through the worship experience. Secondly, that there is a gospel logic or gospel drama to worship, how it flows, that it flows from the idea, in the Dutch Reformed tradition, it would be a pattern of guilt, grace, gratitude, that as you go through the service, in the flow of the service, you're kind of going through a Christian conversion and life experience, starting out as one confronted by the righteousness of God and the law of God, confessing your sin, receiving forgiveness, being exhorted to walk in newness of life, and that kind of pattern plays out. So there's a logic to the worship, and then also this dialogical principle of having actual communication where God is speaking in a variety of ways, through His Word, and also through pastors, teachers, emissaries that He sends, and also the people speaking back to God in this kind of dialogue, this holy dialogue, and we do that obviously through song. Is one powerful way of praising God, through prayers, lifting our prayers up, through responses. And so those three principles are kind of at the core of Reformed liturgy, to express those ideas that worship is covenantal, that it's telling a story, a drama, the drama of redemption, a gospel logic to it, and that it is also this dialogue of participation between and interchange between God and his people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think, Anthony, if an outsider were to visit our church, well, okay, during non-pandemic times, were to visit a non-pandemic service at Rochester Christian Reformed Church, if they had a lot of experience in other traditions, they might say, oh, this is like a very interesting middle ground between low church and high church. This is a very interesting middle ground between between being a Baptist and being an Anglican. How much of that appearance is because of our theology, and how much of that is practical for non-biblical reasons?
So, Adam, you'll have to give me an example of, I think, at one level, I think you make an accurate statement that there is a mixture, like that middle ground that you're speaking of. I think is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I might be thinking it's middle for a different reason than you, though.
Well, I guess my question is, how much of our liturgy or our form of worship is motivated by theological conviction, and how much of it is a desire for moderation?
So, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure I could even answer that. I mean, in some ways, I'm only just beginning to. In some ways, the tradition and what we do is really unlike my prior church, where I kind of implemented and recast the way we worshiped. Here, I more kind of came in and, I'm a piece of that worship puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, that was one of the things, it was new to me. For instance, in my prior pastoral experience, I wrote the liturgy. I prepared the bulletin and kind of did that. In this experience, there's an ensemble cast, and which you're a part, right? I didn't have a worship committee. I didn't have a worship coordinator. So in that sense, I'm not sure I could answer. I'm certain that this was shaped by a lot of forces over time.
Yeah.
And I know that the church went through different periods of being more high church. For instance, and at times being, more resistant to high church, depending on who that was, the choir director, who was the worship coordinator, who was on those committees. So I think that, so that our current one is reflecting a continuing legacy. I'm not sure I can answer it any better than that, unless you have more specific questions.
No, that's exactly the kind of answer that I was looking for. Just from a practical point of view, from the day in, day out work of doing church, being the church, how do these decisions come about? And you answered that question.
But it seems like when you have a committee, and if we believe we talked about this with Ryan, like the work of the Holy Spirit, which is in some ways kind of maybe mysterious, that how it strikes what strikes one person, or how some person wants to put input into what should be a part of the service. It kind of becomes something more practical than, hopefully it's not heretical. Like, we don't want to be like, you don't want to have something that is teaching terrible theology, but at the end of the day, it's gonna be, it's kind. I get that makes it more living and breathing, because it's not just something you're doing, like you said, Pastor Anthony.
No, and I think that's, overall, I'm appreciative of that kind of collaborative process. And I realize sometimes you do things by committee, and it doesn't turn out to be all that attractive of a thing. In this case, it's worked out pretty well, and I've seen the benefits of that. And I've also, because it was already kind of generally aligned with my own views, I didn't feel a real need to kind of come in and make massive changes, because I went to the church because it kind of expressed my views on liturgy and worship, and so it wasn't something it was something I appreciated as it is. Although we can always, and I think we are getting to that point now. My third year, really. We're talking about that. Even the crisis offers some time to think about things, but people don't like change very much. So
yes, we had a great full-time church musician on a few weeks ago, and he said people can accept change. What they cannot accept is loss. And I thought that was really,
that's great.
That was really very true and very insightful into human nature.
I think there is going to that point about change and loss, and I think one of the I think there's a view about worship that it should be fresh or innovative, different, novel every week, and then there's another view that takes the view, well, no, it should be something. Liturgy is best when it is these kind of consistent patterns of worship, and I'm definitely in this latter category, and that makes me. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis about this that I think captures what would be my view of liturgy. He said, every service is a structure of acts and words through which we receive a sacrament, or repent, or supplicate, or adore, and it enables us to do these things best. If you like it, it works best when through long familiarity, we don't have to think about it. As long as you notice and have to count the steps, you are not yet dancing, but only learning to dance. A good shoe is a shoe you don't notice. The perfect church service would be one where we almost were unaware of. Our attention would have been on God. And so that's kind of, I think about that liturgy should be like an old, a shoe you don't notice. It should be this thing. And that is formative itself.
Yes.
And, one of the things, it could seem, well, the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, yada, yada, yada. I heard these a million, Well, the reason you need to hear them a million times is because they're putting things into they're shaping you, right? They're really having God uses those things. So I'm a real proponent of being non-innovative.
So you said that in your present context, you can, you sort of step in and you don't feel the need to recast the worship. What are some examples of things that you would feel absolutely necessary? Trends in church practice that you would feel absolutely necessary to recast were you in a different congregation?
You want to get me in trouble, don't you, Adam?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to make you unhireable to all the other churches, so you have to stay at our CRC forever.
Well, so like you have to know yourself and where you could serve, and I guess I would be sharing here what is my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not trying to say that people who do X, Y, or Z are not Christian or whatever, or outside the fold,
Right.
but like knowing myself, I mean, I could not go to a performance or entertainment model type of church, right? I couldn't do that. I can't do 25 minutes of music that's called worship, and then you have preaching, which and the rest of the thing that's not called worship.
Right.
So that kind of excludes me from all most modern evangelical experiences. So I'm never going to be a mega church pastor. It's not going to happen for me. I've given up all hope of having a real TV ministry, or so that it's just not me. Now, having said that, I'm not necessarily trying to disparage anybody for whom that is them, and who wants to serve in that context. And a lot of good work gets done. There are definitely critiques I could offer of us,
Mm-hmm.
and but just for me, I couldn't do that, or in anything where the focus of worship became anthropocentric. Got this kind
Yes.
of focus, where it becomes much more about whether it's self-esteem building, or it's about me, or and that can show up often in music, with kind of vapid, I don't know, meaningless lyrics, or
Mm-hmm.
even just kind of the we all know the joke. So I'm in that crowd. Okay, I'm the old curmudgeon reform guy. So and I would certainly have a hard time serving in any church that would make that the focus of worship. And usually that means stripping out liturgy in the way that I would be thinking about it in a Reformed liturgy. The dialogical, the covenantal, the gospel logic would be ripped out. It would still have a liturgy, but it would be 25 minutes of singing and a sermon.
Mm.
That's
Yes.
so.
Yes.
I you mentioned mentioned innovating, and I wonder if we could kind of drill into that a little bit, because almost every song, right, that we sing in worship was new at one point, right? It was not traditional, because we said the tradition, I think we're all with you, like this, the tried and true, the tested is what we want to use. But so and music is one of those places where we really where we are divided. I've had the chance to work and attend churches where everything about the service is the same except what they're singing. And so, like, what are the parts that we shouldn't innovate on versus the parts that could be something new, or maybe if we want to think about singing, what needs to be in a song for it to be something that is profitable and beneficial in our liturgy.
Yeah, it's a great point, and this is an area where I've grown, maybe been pushed a little bit to grow. Uh, so I mean, I want to make sure I say, first of all, just because it's old doesn't mean it's good.
Right.
I tend to
Mm-hmm.
want to
Yes.
look back into tradition to draw things out. But again, I'd want to draw the good, and there are bad things in tradition too. Also, and particularly, I am not a fan of a lot of the 19th century hymns. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, there's a certain some of them, some of them are great, but some of them are like, these lines, this kind of, I don't know, kind of sappy stuff. I don't know. So I mean, and they're old, but they're not good. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen many things that are new and have been written recently that are beautiful. So, and I've once you stop singing the Psalms, and there's a certain sense it's up for grabs, right? If you're at least in the RP church, at least it was pretty clear. There's 150 of them. That's it. Okay, so
Right.
you don't get any more. But I think so. In our own church, my own church experience here, the um, there was an effort to put together and have a mixture of music that would be both traditional and more modern, and so probably not something Selvaggio is going to come up with on his own, right? So just because I'm old curmudgeon, and like I don't like for baseball too. I like the old style baseball, So anyhow, but I saw this. I could see value in what was being done, and so what had to be there for me to be comfortable with it was a sense that we were selecting things of some merit, some theological quality, and so it would go, Phil, to that thing. You look at it and say, does this declare something that is worthy and commendable and glorious about God, or is it just like some talking about sunsets and unicorns and ponies or something? I don't know, like these kind of songs where it's just like, is it really express theological content, and is it focused on God? Is it theocentric? And there are many of those. And so one of the ways it worked for us was to kind of look at, well, we've got a hymnal that was put together by musical professionals and also theologically oriented people. They came together, they tried to select things that were beautiful and appropriate from a musical perspective, that had aesthetic kind of qualities, and then also theological qualities. And this is a good place of agreement, right? So it's vetted through that, and there's old and there's new. That's kind of how we worked it, and I'm comfortable with that. So and it helped me to kind of grow a little bit in that. So I can grow, I can change.
Right. Not as much of a curmudgeon as you want to say.
Yes. Phil was alluding to the fact that worship, but particularly music, it seems, can sadly it can divide churches. How do you have any examples of ways that worship or music in worship has been a uniting factor, instead has brought people of different backgrounds together?
In our church context,
or in any context?
Certainly I believe in the power of music to unite. The whole study of music itself, and the gift of music, and where it came from, and what came first, music or language, and the whole power of and the fact of the role of music in the scriptures.
Yes.
And it's kind of fascinating, right? And even you can think about it in culture today. I read about this occasionally. I'll be reading something about where do you sing collectively in our culture, right?
Yes.
Maybe a concert or something like that. But like that, this is in church, and so singing itself is a uniting force in the body, right? Because you have many voices becoming one voice, and that's beautiful and powerful. And so, in our particular church context, music has been a unifying and force in the sense of there's so many people involved in music ministry in our church, and this. From the choir to the bells to the praise band, it's just people are really drawn together by that. People have come to our church because of the music, because of me. They're and they're often most afraid that things don't change things, because this is why I left my prior church, because it kind of, we were told if you don't like this change, there's the door, and they went out the door, and so they came to our place. But so there's definitely we're not without tensions and over music, but I've seen that as a powerful, important part of our church life, and I'd also say liturgy plays that role too.
Yes.
And I think a lot of if you have good music in church and good liturgy, you could probably get by with, mediocre preaching, which I try to prove every week.
Wow.
So,
wow. Yeah, I've never heard you preach a mediocre sermon. Even if I've wondered.
Oh, there's definitely
to our listening audience. Yeah. Now that COVID has forced the church onto YouTube, there's a veritable library of video sermons available.
Yes, we broke 100 subscribers. It's very exciting. I think
great.
900 more we might be able to monetize. I mean, it's
Right.
9,900 more, and then you
really? It's 10,000?
Yes.
Oh boy, we'll never make that.
You know what though? I don't want to be too abrupt of a change of topic, but since I did mention the pandemic, when you are doing something for the first time, like putting a worship service or converting a worship service into a video to be released for your congregation and anyone else who wants, how do you decide what elements of liturgy are still relevant and which just don't make sense any longer?
Yeah, that was one of the hardest parts of the transition. So, given what I said about us being old, stodgy, traditional kind of a church, we were not well equipped. So, what one of the things, the advantage of a performance or entertainment model of worship is that you got the tech, right? You're already there, and you got the screens, you're projecting, you've got soundboards, you've got capabilities. Usually you've got somebody who's a full-time tech person. We had none of those things. So, and, early on, it was the first service was, the first Sunday, we closed on a Friday. And so the first thing that people got was just a sermon. And, immediately there was this kind of feedback. We want music and we want liturgy. And so you can see how important those things are. And eventually we were able to incorporate those in I think really helpful ways, and people were ministered. But it showed the importance of music and liturgy to people's sense of connecting with God and growing in their faith. They missed it. And so, as far as it's hard to do. We do actually do responsive readings of sorts, but it's a little weird. So you're kind of hoping somebody's out there speaking the other way. But I still wrestle mostly because of practical reasons of size and kind of organizing certain things and having non-ordained leadership. So depending on your theological perspective and how you view certain things, there's certain elements of worship, of the liturgy, that it should be done by a pastor only. And so sometimes I'm not the liturgist, and so we're not doing the full orbed worship service, but we are trying to incorporate as many elements as we possibly can. Obviously, the most difficult are the sacraments. Yeah. Yes. So that's where it becomes quite challenging to do that over some type of video production.
So we can't all use saltine crackers. Like
yes.
Have our saltine cracker in front of the Zoom camera. Just
Oh, but I hope this isn't too off topic. I found, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic, when we felt uncomfortable even to meet outdoors, I was very grateful for virtual versions of the Lord's Supper. I was very grateful. I found those very meaningful. As absurd as it was to sit in front of my computer in my living room wearing gym shorts. But I mean, we Reformed people believe in the sacraments as means of grace. And I did feel God's Spirit working through those.
I did too, but I had my many of my Reformed brethren were were not willing to do that uh, under a view of how can you fence the table. How can you exercise church discipline with these things? And there's certainly I get what they're saying about that, and so. Uh, but I would agree with you. I felt that was, um, that's what I struggled with, because if the means of grace to not have it for a long period of time, I just so I took it as one of those exigent circumstances of life, right? That this is not how we would normally want to do it. This is not the ideal, but in times like these, you are allowed, and there are precedent for that in church history. So but I'm with you. I found it to be meaningful.
Yeah, it. If I before while we're still on the topic of COVID, and I think, we're talking about just the kind of the salve that liturgy can be, lamenting in this time as well, like how because that's something we don't really a lot of evangelical churches don't do well. We can't really talk about the hard and or sad parts of the Bible, or the sad parts or hard parts about our human experience. How what are your thoughts on how we can best either minister to or just live in lament in as we worship?
Yeah, well, this goes back to my psalm singing heritage here. This is one of the advantages of psalm singing, is that so many of the psalms are psalms of lament, and in those psalms, you're kind of training people with a spiritual, sanctified vocabulary of how to do this, and to understand how appropriate it is to cry out, to ask how long, O Lord, to even throw some things around and get angry a little bit about things
Right.
with God, and so there's a real earthy spirituality there, this voice of lament that has been largely lost in the church. So it's not by mere coincidence that after in the early parts of the pandemic, I went to Psalms of Lament as preaching material, and also preached through Lamentations just most recently to do that. So that is one of the things I wrestle with about in kind of modern church music. That and I know there are some people who are doing this. People are, even the Psalms are being rendered in new ways by Sons of Korah, groups like that, whatever. The But to find a hymn of lament, and this goes back to that 19th century, like I'm happy all the day kind of Christianity, and you think about like a performance church, they're whooping it up, and then all of a sudden you go to a dirge on that, I am, my bones are sticking out, and I feel like I wish I was never born. It just doesn't kind of doesn't really work to so, but it's sad in a way. Now I may be totally, there may be a whole bunch of stuff out there. I'm no musical expert, where people are trying to do that, and hymns of lament or whatever, and getting that voice of lament. But I think that's I think that would provide a more realistic and helpful spiritual formation if that was more often part of our worship experience, and there are appropriate places. One of the advantages of gospel logic is that, and using a liturgy, is that there are places, if you have 25 minutes of get excited, here's the music, it's kind of hard to throw that in. But if you have a pattern of liturgy where you start out call to worship, we're going to have a hymn of adoration, and then you go into confession of sin. Whoa, okay, so now you're in a point in the service where a song of lament would be appropriate, or even after the time of prayer, pastoral prayer, where you're focusing on suffering in the world, and you can bring out a hymn of, a song of lament that would. So one of the benefits of liturgy is it does have kind of mountains and valleys, appropriate places to accent with that type of praise and lament together.
Right. That's so good.
Yes.
Pastor Anthony, before we move into our final segments, is there anything that you feel like has gone unsaid that you'd like to say now?
No, I think we covered it really well. I'm obviously a big advocate of liturgy. I'm glad you're talking about it. I think it's a wonderfully helpful part of spiritual formation, and so go out and advocate for it. But I think you did a great job. I have nothing to say. I have spoken.
All right, Phil, our interviewing skills must be getting better.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, it's the Holy Spirit,
Well, Anthony, we end every episode with 2 recurring segments. The first is Current Events Corner, where we reflect on something in the news recently that's been on our minds. And the second is What Did We Learn, where we just recap something from the episode we just took part in before we go. So, are you willing to play along?
Yes.
Excellent. Phil, how about you go first for Current Events Corner this week?
Okay. I just had it in my head and then I forgot, I think. Could you go first? I really just forgot.
Yes. I will go first then.
Okay, thanks.
We try to keep our topics somewhat jovial, I think, but as a Rochesterian, I am just really grieving this week the murder of Daniel Prude that came to light, and I think there is no worse reason that a city would want to be in the national spotlight, and I think when Rochester started to be mentioned on we are a podcast, so I mean I listen to podcasts every day, and when Rochester was the second story on NPR's Up First, and then today's episode, where we're filming this on Tuesday, September 8th, today's episode of The Daily from the New York Times was reported here from Rochester. I am so sad at the injustices in the world. I'm so sad that there are people who are hurting so badly, and I am my heart is heavy because it's here in my backyard, and I guess it's making me realize that my heart should have been this heavy all along, because these injustices are happening all around us. So that's, sorry to be a downer, that's my current event for this week. Phil, did you remember yours?
I did, and I mean, it actually kind of goes along with yours. One of the things I've been thinking about as we've kind of, seen protests continue and then turn into other things, and then what we're seeing in Portland is really, and in Oregon is really becoming, even in Wisconsin and Illinois, is really becoming a very, very volatile situation. The thing that I'm thinking about is the need for dialogue, like not just talking at someone or just talking about them, but actually talking to them, and I don't know if we're at this place. I don't know if we could, like, if we're ready to have this dialogue, but I just feel like that's what needs to happen next. Like, we need to have a dialogue between
Yes.
about, what does public safety really look like, and what has it looked like? What have we called public safety? What that wasn't,
Right.
and then what should it look like? And so that's something that's on my heart, and even something that I'm looking at how to try to have those conversations. Like I said, and that's is it the right time? With the leaders that I have here, is it the right time, and how do we do that? So, yeah.
Thank you. Pastor Anthony, how about you?
Well, obviously I'm a fellow Rochesterian, and I've unlike you, having been here all my life and having worked in downtown Rochester, walking the streets, and actually many times in the public safety building. So I guess I had a jovial one, but I'll go with this. Feeling this, and it's I'm thankful that things here seem to be taking a life preserving path.
Yes.
There seems to be some healthier dynamics, but I just feel for everyone caught up in this, and I guess I put out a prayer, and I've been praying for our city. I've been praying for everyone involved, and I talked about a passage I'm preaching out of Ecclesiastes, and the passage about he's talking about the futility of situations or repetitive cycles in life, and how things seem to happen over and over again, and there's a lot of people feeling that futility, and things not changing. And then he says, that the crooked can't be made straight, and so, and of course he's talking about perspective of life under the sun, perspective of life without God. And as Christians, as people of faith, we gotta believe. we gotta believe that which is crooked can be made straight, because all three of us are crooked,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
we believe that Jesus came to straighten us out, and I just want that for the world, and I want a better world. I want the world to be made straight.
Yes. Yes. Phil, what did you learn this week?
I think I really liked, Pastor Anthony, how you talked about the ebb and flow of liturgy, and how we can soar and even go into the depths in the same service, and through how we form it. And I really like your point on the Psalms, and how you said it's the spiritual and sanctified vocabulary. It gives us that vocabulary, hearing it, singing it. And so, and I've experienced that whenever I can cry out with David, how long? And I can also cry out with David, you are my refuge.
Amen.
Yeah. Woo! You are my refuge. And so sorry. Yeah. Woo.
I like it.
You have nothing to apologize for, Phil. I will say, so many good things I could pull out, but I'll say just, Anthony, you as my pastor, I feel like over the 3 years that we've known one another, I've, gotten to know your heart for ministry, your heart for serving God and his people. And I think today what I really appreciated was just your, you joke, that you're a curmudgeon, but I think part of serving God's people is knowing who you are, and knowing your context, and so that's just all woven throughout our conversation today. You kept coming back to how many decisions are rooted in knowing your people. So thank you for that.
And I guess I would say, and it's interesting, I really mean this, that as I was reflecting on this, as we were discussing about how much I have benefited from, I talked about this experience of being a pastor where I was, kind of a one-man band, so to speak, and now working in this context of an ensemble cast, I recognizing that I'm better for it. That I have, just like in everything in life, people helped, because I am who I am. I know who I am, as you the old curmudgeon. People have come around and have helped to, I guess, provide in a more full experience, contributed to me things that I wouldn't have come up with on my own, and I've been a beneficiary of this kind of community, spirit-led ensemble, committee, whatever you want to call it, perspective, and that's been a healthy thing for me, and I hope for my church as well.
Amen. I do like the phrase "spirit-led committee."
Is that an oxymoron?
Has anything ever described Reformed churches better than spirit-led committee? Oh, Phil, is there anything else for the good of the order?
No, I think that's it.
All right, well then, dear audience, I will say bye for now.
Adios.
Peace.